Hi, I'm Rachel, and I'm here to do an Author's Answer video. The Author's Answer series was started by J.D. Archer and his writing group, where they have asked and answered and posed questions about the writing life, and I will link to his playlist and to my own AuthorTube playlist down below. I do these questions sequentially one a month, and I'm up to question number 19. Question number 19 is when or how did you start writing and what genres do you write? So a little bit of personal biography backstory. I was born 4 weeks premature and I was diagnosed as being on the autism spectrum, and I also had some delays in speech and motor skills. All of this meaning that starting from the age of 2 I went to what they called a special school for people with learning disabilities, and mostly it turned out to be to get myself up to speed with some, of the speech and motor skills, and to see, I guess, how my autism spectrumness would pan out. And by the time I was 6 and finished the first grade, it was clear that I was good to go for a regular curriculum. So I graduated from my special school. And we had this nice ceremony, and then we were presented with these little autograph books. But the first thing I felt very clearly when I got my autograph book was this wasn't a book to take around to friends and teachers and get them to sign. This was a book for me to write a story. My sister at the time, who was a year younger than me, had an egregious case of the chicken pox, and I knew that I had to write the story, "My sister has the chicken pox," which I did, illustrating every page about the types of weather and situations where Jana had the chicken pox, and then dashing to my mother so she could write in the words. So that was it. That was my jump start to being an author when I was 6 years old, or a writer anyway. And so I mean, when I was a child and writing and going to writing workshops and camps and that sort of thing, I wrote a variety of stuff from realist fiction to fantasy. It was, I guess, mostly about plucky girls and adventure and friendship and that sort of thing, but I'll skip past the childhood stuff and talk about why I write what I write as an adult. Well, I predominantly write literary short stories, and I've written a novella. And the major reason I think I write in the literary genre is that I am not good at plot. I'm really taken with characters and themes, and my stories are pretty much, insular little tales about people living in their heads. So the literary character-driven realist setting is a good place for me, and it's also what I predominantly read, literary and mainstream non-genre fiction. That being said, we're less than a month out from 2018 NaNoWriMo, and this year I decided to do a fantasy project. I've done some fantasy before, but only as a kid or in a non-serious manner where I knew it wasn't really going anywhere. But for this project, I feel like I'm gonna try to take it somewhere. And I will tell you, I guess, what drew me to the idea of writing fantasy, and I guess in a way it has to do with the fact that I mostly read literary fiction, but I also do read some science fiction and fantasy, and a lot of my favorite television shows and movies tend to be in the science fiction and fantasy genre, so I guess it only makes sense that after a while I might feel compelled to dip my toe in. And my inspiration does come a lot from what I see and what I want to expand upon. The spark that got me into wanting to write this fantasy novel was really all seasons of Game of Thrones, but I guess particularly the last one really sparked me, or maybe the last two, with the character of Sansa Stark. The conceit about the character of Sansa Stark is that she is a high-born lady who plays the part, And her backstory is that she fits well into the society of the feminine arts and graces. Like, she plays the high harp and is wonderful at domestic tasks, and that this is the norm for her society, and the anomaly is to be the tomboy character, like her sister Arya. But in reality, within the story of Game of Thrones, there's very little emphasis put on anything feminine and domestic, and a lot more emphasis put on fighting and scrapping along and, you know, being a tomboy and masculine and that sort of thing. And so the whole general narrative is, you know, you fit into the society, but I didn't. But we never see her actually fitting in. So that made me think about, I want to write some sort of story where a Sansa character fits in. Although I guess I wanted to go beyond that. I wanted to write a story where the magic catered toward the feminine. And then that slowly turned into a story where there's, you know, masculine, patriarchal sort of magic, and then there's feminine magic. And that the masculine magic was seen as more important, but the feminine magic had some perks that people didn't really realize were perks anymore. And so again, that went into more than Game of Thrones, this sort of griping about patriarchy and femininity and power plays. That also was inspired by some takes I have on a couple of fairy tales and their adaptations. I'm really taken with the 2003 Peter Pan movie, the live-action movie, and it really puts that emphasis so strongly on the fact that the character drama takes place during a time where Peter and Wendy are on the cusp of growing up, and they're sort of clinging between adolescence or being children and then being young adults or teenagers at least. And then I also did read the J.M. Barrie story, and I was struck to how it ended with the fact that, you know, this story is really about Wendy, because Wendy's the person who changes, and Peter, who remains in Neverland, is a boy, and so of course he ultimately forgets her. And so that stuck with me too for this project. And the other thing that stuck with me was the story of Little Red Riding Hood. You know, Little Red Riding Hood is a story about policing female sexuality. And so to me, kind of like how I'm fascinated that Mr. Darling and Captain Hook are played by the same person in a lot of the movies and the plays and that sort of thing, and it's a commentary on what the patriarchal grown-up world is for Wendy. What I'm taken with in Little Red Riding Hood is the question of who the wolf is. And, you know, in a simplistic reading, I guess, you know, it's the evil, tempting wolf, and then the protective, chauvinistic woodcutter. But that's a little too simple for me in a story that's about policing feminine sexuality. So the story that answered the question of who the wolf is that I like the most is admittedly a horrible adaptation. It's I think from 2011, the Amanda Seyfried version. It's just really melodramatic drivel, but I liked the answer they have for the wolf question, and that also is going to factor into the plotting of my fantasy novella. I'm calling it a novella because really I'm not sure I have the fortitude for a plot long enough for a novel. I don't know. But anyway, the final ingredient on all of this is the world building, and I guess this also plays into fantasy because I was drawn to world building that plays on Jewish themes, but then I guess it gives me the freedom to not have to know every intricate detail of Jewish history or Jewish culture or what. I mean, it's something I'm relatively well schooled in, at least, but because people who watch this channel know I read a lot of Jewish fiction and Jewish nonfiction, but fantasy gives me the freedom to maybe be able to probe ideas of Jewish peoplehood and existential concerns, but within a framework that where I can control everything, and because it's a fake world, and where I can impose some of my own opinions and values in a way that you can't always in reality. So that's the final piece that drew me to writing fantasy, because I think I really do approach science fiction and fantasy not only for the coolness of making a world full of magic or thinking ahead to futuristic technological things for science fiction, but it's a platform really for addressing our real life social concerns in a maximist way. The way that what I love doing in my literary fiction is addressing our concerns as people in a minimal way, with a smaller cast, with smaller concerns for the most part. Meaning the ins and outs of contemporary, usually in my case, domestic life. But anyway, I am now rambling, and I'll try to make this video a little shorter than I've made some of the others, so I guess this is a place for me to stop. And you can find out a little more about my NaNoWriMo writing project by clicking on the link that I have below. I hope I'll see some of you in November doing this along with me. And in the meantime, thanks so much for watching, everyone. Keep writing, and I'll see you next time.